This is the Your Career Story podcast, and you're listening to episode 22, 5 Ways to Know It's Time for a New Job, Pronto. Welcome to Your Career Story podcast, a show that's designed for rockstar professionals looking for that extra booster shot of confidence in their careers. Whether you're trying to get clarity on a job transition, want some work-life balance inspiration, or need a strategy to snag that promotion or raise, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Jenna Viviano, ex-Wall Streeter turned startup junkie who now coaches hundreds of clients, empowering them to take back control of the job search and land their dream job. So sit back, grab a glass of wine, and prepare yourself for your weekly boost of career confidence. Welcome back, friends. Today we are talking about how to know if it's time for a new job. Now, I get this question a lot from readers and clients. The question becomes, do I stick it out or is it really time to move on? It can feel really confusing, especially if you don't have a specific job lined up. And I remember being in your shoes. I would get the itch. It was time to move on, probably like every 2 years or so in my career. And sometimes that itch was like 15 mosquito bites had just bit me and I needed to get out stat. And sometimes it was just this nagging hunch that maybe my time had expired at the place that I was currently working and that it was time to start looking for a new opportunity. In those instances, I wasn't really miserable, but I wasn't really thrilled to be there every day. And maybe that's something you can relate to. Maybe you are the person that is itching to get out and you got 15 mosquitoes biting, you're like, I have to get out of here. Or you're kind of having this nagging feeling that maybe it's time to move on. You're not really miserable, but you're not really happy. Both can be reasons to decide, hey, it is time to move on from this job. Now, I know it can feel really overwhelming at first. So you're kind of thinking about, do I really need to move on? Do I not need to move on? I'd start to question when I was going through this, am I being a quitter? Shouldn't I be here a little bit longer? Especially for my first job out of school. I was only in there for about 9 months. I kept thinking to myself, shouldn't I be in here longer? I thought about what would my future employer think? Would they think that I'm a job hopper? That's the one thing I definitely didn't want to be thought of as. And I had all the range of emotions, anything from feeling guilty to feeling really silly to feeling absolutely foolish for wanting to move on to new companies from time and time again. But throughout my process and throughout my career, my dad taught me something very early on about my first job, that job where I left within 9 months. And I'll kind of go into a little bit about why I did that and why that was definitely a reason for me to move on. And if you listen to last week's episode where I talked all about my career trajectory from Wall Street to career coach, you're going to know a little bit more about this. But in my first year of adulting, if you would say, my dad said this really poignant quote to me. He told me, he said, a company will only be as loyal to you as what makes financial sense to them. I'll say that again. A company will only be as loyal to you as what makes financial sense to them. And so that really stuck with me. Whether you are working for a really awesome organization, maybe you work for a nonprofit or you're working for a company that you really believe in and they really value their people, at the end of the day, if the company can't afford to keep you, they won't be able to keep you. So what that told me, and what that should tell you, is that if you are thinking about making a move and you're feeling guilty because you want to make sure you're being loyal to the company, those are absolutely valid and very valiant thoughts to have. But you have to make strategic career moves for yourself because the only person that will advocate for you in your career is yourself, or a career coach if you hire one. But the only person that you can guarantee that will advocate for you in your career is yourself. And so I had to start thinking bigger about my career and about my career changes. Now, I always tell my clients this, make sure that you're moving towards something and you're just not quitting something. That is a big differentiator between a lot of people who think it's time to move on. Sometimes they just want to quit because they're so over where they're currently working, when really you need to be thinking about, am I moving on to something strategic in my next move? And if you are, you're probably on the right track. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking to yourselves, well, Jenna, I don't want to be perceived as flippant. Going back to that job hopper thought process. I don't want to look like I'm somebody who changes jobs every year, or I don't want to change jobs every 2 years and have somebody think that maybe I'm not going to be loyal to them. And that is a totally, totally valid concern. And I hear that question and that objection pop up a lot. Now, hear me out. I am not telling you to change jobs every year. I actually don't think that's really wise. And I think for most, especially new grads, if you are a new grad, this is directly towards you. You should stay in your first job unless a couple of extenuating circumstances like your health or something like that is being affected. You should stay in that first job for at least 2 years. And there's a couple of reasons why I really think that that is a super, super important point, is because you learn so much in those 2 years. Your first 2 years is not supposed to be happy at work. That may be counterintuitive, and a lot of people may not agree with me on that, but your first 2 years out of school is meant to soak up as much information as possible. And you can't do that if you're constantly changing jobs. It takes about 3 months to get really comfortable in a position. And the first 3 months at a new job, you typically feel like you're failing. So if you're constantly changing new jobs, you're basically wasting 3 months getting to know that job and then starting to learn actually what you need to learn, maybe about the work dynamics or about your specific profession or industry that you're in. So hear me out. I'm not telling you to change jobs every year. Now, it sometimes is totally appropriate, though, to stay where you are, to stick it out, to see if anything will change. But oftentimes, if you've been wanting to leave for a while, it's probably time to start setting your sights somewhere else. And I'm going to give you actually 5 ways to know it is time for a new job. So let's dive right in. Number 1 is if you have been in this job for over 6 months and you have wanted to fake sick every day in those 6 months. So it's been over 6 months and you just want to fake sick every single day. It may be time for you to find a new position. It may be time to start looking elsewhere. As I mentioned before, it takes 3 months to get used to that job. So you might have some time where you're like, I'm not really sure if this job is for me or not. Wait the 3 months out. You may find that the job was just a friction of you trying to get used to the new system, used to new company, used to new people, used to a new industry. Give yourself some grace in that process. Another thing is it usually takes about 3 months for a company to transition. I saw this when I worked for a startup, and we were changing all the time, and that could be really stressful. And there was definitely seasons that were more stressful and more conflicting and more like, oh gosh, I just want to stay home sick today, than other days. But the reality was that in 3 months, that cycle would pass and we'd kind of move on to a new equilibrium. So especially if you're in a growing company, give yourself some time and your company time to transition as they're doing it. Now, if you have been in it for 6 months and you've been noticing every day, nothing's changing, 6 months is a really long time to be miserable. So if you hit that 6 month mark and nothing's changing, nothing's growing, there's no transition in the organization, you're not in your first segment of this new job. If it's 6 months and you are pretty miserable still, it is definitely probably time to start looking, hey, maybe there's some other opportunity that's a better fit for me. It may not be the company's fault. It may not be the people's fault. It just might not be a good fit. I talk about this a lot if you've listened to my podcast before, and I hope that you do. But we spend about 90,000 hours in our entire lifetime working. That is a lot of hours to be miserable. And you really should like going to work. I don't believe that everyone has to have this massive dream job and have this epitome of success and all those different things. But I do think that we need to go into work. We need to be able to enjoy where we are. And we need to show up and actually use our skills and giftings. And actually like the people that we're working with. The majority of reasons why people actually leave jobs isn't necessarily because they don't like their job function. It's most often, and you can think about this for yourself, it's most often that they don't like their manager, they don't like their coworkers, or they don't like the overall mission of the organization. Very rarely is it actually that they hate the job function. So if you are that anomaly, please direct message me and tell me about your story because I would love to hear more about it. But typically speaking, if it's been over 6 months and you just want to fake sick every day, if it's been 3 months to get used to the job, you've already went 3 months of transition, 6 months later, you're still not happy, it may be time to start looking. So that is number 1. Okay, all my wannabe career changers, it is time to make some moves. You've been in analysis paralysis for way too stinking long, and it's time to take a leap of faith. Quit just consuming articles about changing careers and actually start taking action. I've personally experienced every fear that you're probably feeling right now. Self-doubt, fear of not using my degree, fear of failing, overwhelmed that there are way too many options, paralyzed because I'm petrified of making a terrible move and ending up destitute on the side of the road with no money to my name and shame written across my forehead. Sound familiar? It doesn't have to be so hopeless. It can actually be fun, which is why I created an actionable guide to get you out of your paralysis and into your dream job, even if you're not sure what that is just yet. If you've been feeling like it's time to make a move for 6 months or more, but don't know where to start, I have just the resource for you. My What's Your Next Career Move Guide. In this clarity guide, I walk you through 4 simple stages that will move you from hopeless to hopeful in your career. head on over to www.jennaviviano.com/career clarity to snag your free copy. In this guide, I give you questions to journal through and action steps you can start making today to get yourself out of overwhelm and into structure and peace. I've worked with over 900 clients from around the world and walked through this exact framework, and it works. So if you're looking to change careers, you need to head on over to www.jennaviviano.com/career clarity and grab my free What's Your Next Career Move guide. Number 2 is if you don't trust leadership. Now, this is such a big deal. And I think a lot of people don't really think about this. So when I was actually a sales trainer for the Muse, I got put into kind of a leadership type-ish role. I wasn't really managing a direct team, but I was leading our teams through sales training processes. And so a lot of that, I got involved with what culture looked like for our organization. And so a lot of the reps would come to me and chat with me about their current complaints or concerns or things that they wanted to invest in and with their own professional development. And I had this one rep who asked if I would go for a walk. And we kind of had a couple conversations about this before. And I just knew he was unhappy in the job. And we went to walk around the block and we were kind of out there for about a half an hour. And I was just listening to all of his concerns. And I was kind of throwing some other ideas of how he could reframe what he was thinking about until I turned to him and I looked at him and I said, "Do you just not trust leadership?" And he kind of thought about it for a second. And he turned to me and goes, "No, I really don't." I said, "Okay, I think that's where you and I differ. I do believe leadership, and that's okay if you don't, but I trust leadership, even if I might not agree or understand with every single decision that they're making. At the end of the day, I think that they are doing the best in their power with the information that they have at this present moment to make the best decisions for our company and for our team members." And so I truly believe that. And so that's why I stick around. And if you are not on that ship, maybe it's time for you to get off. So for yourself, if you're listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, actually, I really don't trust leadership. And when I say leadership, I don't mean maybe the CEO of the company if you're in a really large organization. Maybe that is the case for you if you're really passionate about that. I usually mean if it's a couple of levels above you. If maybe your manager or your senior manager are a couple levels above, if you just don't trust their vision for the organization, you're going to have a really hard time engaging at work and doing really good work. And not to mention, if you're really miserable, you're going to be a toxic part of that culture. And you don't want to be a toxic part of the culture. I don't want you to be a toxic part of the culture. So maybe that's another sign that if you don't trust leadership, it is time to leave. And so I actually told the gentleman, I said, maybe you just don't need to be here. And I felt really guilty saying that. I went to my manager afterwards. I was like, I don't know if I said the right thing. But a couple of days later, he did actually leave the organization, or a couple of weeks later, he actually left the organization and found a different role that suited him. And there was no hard feelings there. It was just the reality was he didn't trust leadership. And if you don't trust leadership, you're not going to work hard. And if you don't work hard, you're not going to succeed. And it's just a ripple effect. It's not going to be great. So again, I just want to reiterate, it doesn't mean that you have to agree with every single thing that they do. But if your overarching feeling is like, I don't trust leadership because I don't see their vision for the organization and I don't trust them, it may be time for you to move on and find a different company where you could actually trust the leadership. The third way to know if it's time to move on for a new job pronto is if your job is making you physically ill. Now, this seems ridiculous, but it absolutely happens. It happened to me in my very first job out of school. Again, if you listened to last week's episode, you heard me talk a little bit about my experience working on Wall Street and what it did actually to my physical, mental, and emotional health. And if you feel like your job is making you physically ill or physically sick or so mentally ill or emotionally ill that you can't get up in the morning, it is time to leave. My first job that I was in, I just couldn't hack it. And that was the reality of it. I couldn't handle the hours. My body was shutting down. Now, most people, for the record, would shut down if they're working 80 to 100 hours a week. So that is not crazy. But if you're feeling very similar, if you feel like your anxiety is way through the roof and you've been trying to manage it and it's not working, if you are developing some sort of physical ailment from it, I know for me, it manifested in an eating disorder that was really bad. And so I really, really, really want to drive this point home for people that are in New York City and San Francisco. Out of all of my clients, y'all have the worst stress levels and you often have physical reactions to the stress that's going on. So if that is happening to you, this should be a no-brainer. It is time to start moving on. Now, if you're just having stress and it ebbs and it flows, and that's how it was for my jobs kind of after that, I would have stressful, really stressful times, and then it would back off. It would have really stressful times and then it would back off. But then in that first job that I had, it was constant. I was constantly feeling like I was physically ill. I was not well mentally. And I knew that that was the trigger point that it was time to move on. So if you are in that situation, I would highly recommend maybe talking to a licensed professional, whether it's a doctor or a psychologist or something like that, to see if they agree that your physical ailments have been connected to maybe your stress levels at work. Number 4, here is another way to know if it's time for a new job. So if you are feeling really, really bored, now this is kind of the opposite of thinking through like, wow, I'm really miserable. Maybe you are just actually bored. So I see this with a lot of clients who maybe have rose up through the ranks or they've been at a company for a while and they just are looking around themselves and they're thinking, there's really no room for growth here. I really don't find myself getting challenged, and I don't see that there's an option for me to be challenged. That is a really good sign that it may be time to find a new gig. And so here's a couple of rules of thumb when thinking through that. Now, I'm a firm believer that you have to free yourself of the boredom. So it is not only the company's responsibility to make you not bored. When I worked at the New York Stock Exchange, there were definitely times where I felt a little bored, if you can imagine, in the workplace. There were things that I was doing, or I was waiting for a manager to get back to me on certain things, and I was just bored. And so there were things that I would do outside those office hours that got me connected to other departments. So I know for myself, when I worked at the New York Stock Exchange, I knew that I didn't want to have my entire lifetime be in finance. It was just not how I was wired. I didn't really enjoy it as much as my other colleagues. And so I wanted to explore what else was out there for me. And I started to build relationships with other departments. So the marketing department, the public relations department, I built connections with maybe compliance or operations. Both of those I didn't want to do, but more the marketing department and the PR department, I became really close with a lot of people in those divisions. So what that did was it helped me to get myself reinvigorated in my work, see my work as a bigger holistic picture, because I could see how our team was working with their team, which was working with another team, to make sure an IPO would go off without a hitch. Now, so for you, think about it. When was the last time that you actually reached out to somebody in another organization or another department, rather? What could you learn potentially from them that could help you in your current work, keep you invigorated, and help you see that maybe actually you want to move to that department? Or maybe it's you figure out that, hey, this job right now is kind of keeping me bored, but I could see myself growing into another situation. So if you can see that possibility and you can get yourself unboard, maybe it's not time for you to move on. But if you've been doing the same job for a while, if you see no room for growth, and if you're looking up the ranks and thinking, I don't want my boss's job, and I don't want my boss's job, it may be time for you to pick a different career. I know for me, when I worked at the New York Stock Exchange, I looked around at my boss and she was doing amazing work, but I just didn't want her job. I didn't want the lifestyle associated with it, and I didn't want her boss's job. And so when I realized that, it really helped me click and give me the confidence to be like, that's not what I want in the future. So why am I working so hard to keep this thing going, keep this train rolling, when really I could be better suited in a different industry, in a different type of profession that I'm actually going to be thriving and can grow within. And that's when I started to learn about sales and realized that for me, sales was probably a better fit for my personality, my skill set, and really forward growth. So think about it for yourself. Where are you really bored? Can you fix that? If you can't, and you see no room for growth at all in your organization, that you're feeling very suffocated and stifled, it may be time to find a new job. Number 5, the 5th way to know if it's time for a new job is to listen to your gut. Now, this may seem like a bunch of woo-woo, but I am a firm believer in listening to your gut, whether it's in your personal life or in your professional life, but specifically in your professional life. If you have been getting this nudging feeling that it's been time to move on again for that long period of time, then it probably is time to move on. A lot of us kind of ignore or quiet that inner voice that we have, assuming that it'll go away or it's nonsense or it's not practical or logical because we can't see a pathway out. We don't have another job opportunity, whatever it is. We get a little bit frustrated and we just kind of just don't think about it. We're like, oh, that's just a thought. I'm just going to ignore that thought, put it in the back of my head and ignore it. The problem is that thought will get a little bit louder and get a little bit louder and a little bit louder. And it may be signifying to you to point your arrow in a different direction. I know for me, the motto that I've adopted in my career and then in my business is to go where the peace is. So even when decisions don't make a whole lot of sense, I very much operate in going where the peace is. I'll give you a perfect example or a couple examples in my career, in my corporate life, and then in my business life. So in my corporate life, I had a couple of different opportunities. When I was leaving the New York Stock Exchange, I had wanted an organization that was a big tech company. And then I had this really, really tiny small startup called themuse.com, which had 33 employees, no actual round of funding at that point. I think I told my dad that they did have funding, but I think I just lied. Just don't advise that. But I think I just lied to make him feel a little bit more secure that I was going to a company that had funding and all the things. They didn't at the time. And I was looking at these two options, this big tech company that had clear structure and order. And it would actually let me leave New York City, which at the time was my number one goal. I wanted to leave New York so badly. And there was this really small startup that didn't have a ton to offer except for opportunity. And so I looked at those two things, and the logical person and the person that I used to be would have said, Jenna, just go with this big tech company, keep going through the process. You're just going to, it's totally fine that you have to wear the button-up suit every day, that you're going to be basically working with a bunch of finance people in a tech company. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Or I listened to the peaceful space that made no sense, where my salary was getting cut pretty much in half from where I worked at the New York Stock Exchange. I was mostly going to be on commission. And I was working for this company that was really itty bitty and growing, but it didn't have any security or reliability that it was going to exist even in a year from now, 6 months from now. And I looked at those two options, and for me personally, I prayed about it a long time. It was kind of manic. My roommates will probably tell you. But ultimately, I landed that the peace was really where the muse was. And so I went through against all logic. I actually had some people at that other company that were kind of ticked at me for not moving forward and didn't really understand my rationale or logic. They thought that I just didn't want to wear a suit every day, which was actually part of the reasoning. And then I just went with this really small company. And that small company, that urge to go where the peace is, really catapulted my career. I am so proud to have been part of that organization. It helped me launch my career coaching business. I think the founders of that company are amazing. I learned so much during those 2 years of working with them before launching my practice full time that I never regret going where the peace is. And so every single step in my career, I always pivoted slightly towards where I felt more peaceful. That didn't always mean that it was easy at all whatsoever. I can give you a couple of other examples of whenever I was in my business, there was an opportunity that got placed before me. It was a dream opportunity this past year, dream opportunity, something that Jenna 2 years ago would have never imagined for herself, an opportunity with an organization that's doing wonderful things. It was in the Christian sector, and they gave me an amazing opportunity. And I was just kind of going through the process, and I realized I had no peace about the situation. When I told people that I wasn't moving forward with that opportunity, that I was one of the ones who kind of bound out in the situation, I got a lot of people asking me questions like, what? Why would you do that? That seems like your dream gig. And while that may have been true to the outsider or to past Jenna, I really went where the peace was leading me. And I'm so much more confident, and I'm so much happier in the decision that I made. And I'm excited to see what God does with that. But my advice to you is to think about, listen to your gut. What is your gut telling you about where you currently are at? If you've been having this nagging feeling for a really long time, and you've been ignoring it out of quote unquote logic, you're being disobedient to that, and you're acting illogical. So I want to encourage you that if you are feeling any of these 5 things, if you are feeling like it's been over 6 months and you just want to fake sick every day, if you don't trust leadership, if your job is literally making you physically ill, if you're really, really bored and you see no way out, or you are getting this nudge from your gut to tell you, hey, it's time to move on, and you are not, I think it's time for you to actually move on. So I know that the whole process can feel really confusing. You're feeling guilty, you're feeling frustrated, you're feeling overwhelmed, but I'm telling you, if one of these 5 things is true about you, it is definitely time to start moving on to a new job. And so here's the thing about deciding that it's finally time to switch jobs. The beauty of that is once you've finally decided, I'm going to put my stake in the ground, I am going to actually start making movements, things start happening in your career. I see a lot of people who've been stuck for a really long time in their job. They've been kind of doing the same thing over and over again, really unhappy, and they start making movements in the direction they want to go. Things start happening in that direction. They start getting calls from recruiters. They start getting their resume actually seen. They get LinkedIn messages from people who want to connect with them. Things start happening once you start putting your energy towards that way. So I'm really excited that if you've been listening to this and you found this super helpful, please direct message me. I would love to hear from you and hear how you've known now through this podcast episode that it's time for you to make a career move. So head on over to LinkedIn or head on over to Instagram. Connect with me there. I would love to hear more about your story and what you currently are going through, and to answer any questions that you may have along the way. And next week, we're actually going to talk about, once you've made that decision that it's time to get a new job, how do you actually find that new job? And we're specifically going to be talking about how to find a new job when you're moving across country. Stay tuned for that next week. I will see you here at the same time, same place next week. Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for listening to Your Career Story podcast. I would love to get to meet you. And there are a couple of ways that we can connect in between episodes. First and foremost, I love my LinkedIn. Second is via Instagram. And third is over on my website. I actually have a special spot just for you full of fun, free resources. So all you have to do is go to www.jennaviviano.com/resources. Super simple, for a bunch of freebies that will help you boost your career. Hope to see you next week.